Hey everyone, my name is Brendan Lukomski, and today I will be discussing my research into nickel contamination in vaporizer cartridges used for cannabis concentrates. Now, just a little bit of background before we begin. A vaporizer pen typically heats and aerosolizes a liquid concentrate, or in this case, a cannabis concentrate, that's stored in a replaceable cartridge that can be loaded and unloaded within the pen. Now, vaporizer pens have seen increasing use in recent years for a variety of reasons. One, they're discreet, two, they're easy to use, and they're generally seen as a healthier alternative to cigarettes. However, this increasing popularity has also brought with it increasing scrutiny. Vaporizer pens have had countless claims leveled against them for contamination issues, the most recent of which appearing to be metal contamination. Now, it's quite clear that if these claims are true, this is a serious public health concern that does have to be addressed and researched, which ultimately was the motivation behind this study. Now, the state of Michigan currently mandates testing into 7 heavy metals, seen here in this table, alongside their corresponding action limits, or the concentration they have to fall below in the product to meet compliance testing. But for the purposes of this study, we chose to focus on one in particular, nickel. Now, nickel is the newest element of this table, only mandated for testing this past summer, the summer of 2020, and it stands out among the rest of them in that manufacturers have not yet had to account for it being there, and so frankly, it's everywhere. Nickel and chromium are two primary components of stainless steel, which is used extensively in the manufacturing process, from everything from the machinery used to manufacture the cartridges right down to the construction of the cartridges themselves. The heating coil, which is a primary component of the cartridge, is composed of stainless steel. And nickel from this stainless steel can be introduced to the product through a process known as metal leaching. Now, metal leaching occurs when a metallic component comes into contact with a product in which certain amounts of that metal are deposited into the product itself over time. Now, taking into account that there are countless ways that nickel can be introduced into these cartridges, for the purposes of this study, we chose to focus on primarily metal leaching, as this is a primary concern considering the construction of the cartridges and one deserving of further research. Luckily, I was able to carry out this research at a safety compliance laboratory in Traverse City, Cambium Analytica, that had no shortage of clients that were willing to lend us a hand. I was able to obtain 90 cartridges from 4 different manufacturers for use in this 10-day study. Now, it's important to note that these were stock cartridges, meaning cartridges straight off the manufacturer floor that hadn't undergone any of the steps in the downstream production process where the cartridges are stocked with cannabis concentrate. Thus, any nickel contamination that we potentially found would be a direct result of either the manufacturing process or the construction of the cartridges themselves, with nickel being introduced via metal leaching. Now, I stocked these cartridges with vegetable glycerin, which had a negligible nickel content, and then placed 30 from each manufacturer into 3 different temperature environments, a 4 degree, a 25 degree, and a 37 degree environment. On each of those 10 days, I then removed 3 cartridges, digested their contents through microwave digestion, and then analyzed them for nickel content through ICP-MS. And the results were actually quite striking and did go to show that there was a certain amount of nickel content caused by metal leaching. This plot here shows individual cartridge nickel concentration for each of the 10 days for all 4 of the manufacturers we tested. And it really starts to show a lot of the relationships that we were able to extrapolate from this data. First off, this plot definitely shows the manufacturer variation, with manufacturers B and D experiencing many more cartridges above that black 500 parts per billion action limit line than manufacturers A and C. We also begin to see a temperature dependence, with many more of the red and green dots, being the 37 and 25 degrees Celsius environment, being above that action limit than the blue 4 degrees Celsius dots, indicating that there could be a temperature dependence. More on this relationship later. However, what this plot really starts to illustrate is the tremendous amount of variation within individual days. We actually experienced tremendous amount of variation within triplicate cartridges themselves, cartridges that were sampled on the exact same day and subject to the exact same conditions. In fact, the average relative standard deviation among these cartridges was over 50%, a variation that can really be illustrated in this plot, in which the same data is expressed as box plots. And we can really see the variation here, with some box plots on certain days extending all the way from 0 parts per billion all the way to above the action limit. A tremendous amount of variation that could be brought about by individual cartridge variation or even sampling conditions. However, this plot also begins to show the time dependence, or lack thereof. Manufacturers A, C, and D experiencing next to no time dependence with their concentrations, with manufacturing B being basically the only one you could really make a case for, but even that one's a very weak dependence. Overall, this does show that time plays a very insignificant role in determining the amount of metal that's leached into these cartridges. This plot summarizes the concentration data from the past two slides as percentages falling within certain concentration ranges, with the blue bar representing concentrations between 250 and 500 parts per billion, and the gray bar representing concentrations above that action limit of 500 parts per billion. And it really starts to illustrate the tremendous amount of manufacturer variation we were seeing, with manufacturer B clearly faring the worst out of the four we tested, followed by manufacturer D, and then A and C falling in at about the same level. So this definitely starts to show that what manufacturer is used in the construction of these cartridges does play a role, and that certainly their process and the way in which they construct the cartridges does play a significant factor in determining how much nickel is leached into the product. This plot summarizes the data in a similar fashion, but instead of comparing manufacturers, we're comparing temperatures. And it really starts to illustrate that the higher temperature environments generally saw an increase in metal leaching compared to the lower temperature environments, with the 37 degrees Celsius environment showing higher concentrations in that gray 500 parts per billion range and in the 250 to 500 parts per billion range than the 25 degrees Celsius and the 4 degrees Celsius environment respectively. Therefore, it does show that there is some dependence on temperature as well in determining how much nickel is leached into these products. So what does this tell us? Well, for one, it tells us that environmental factors don't really play a role in determining how much nickel is deposited into these products due to metal leaching, and that it's really down to individual cartridge variation caused by differences all the way back in the manufacturing process. Therefore, due to the ability of these stock cartridges to deposit toxic levels of nickel into the product itself, it definitely shows there has to be changes in both the regulations and the practices manufacturers are undertaking in the construction of these cartridges. As it currently stands, cartridges obtained from the manufacturer by the producer can very easily be pushed over the action limit by aspects of the production process. Currently, the machinery used to stock these cartridges with cannabis concentrate is constructed of stainless steel. That and the capping process of these cartridges, which is either done through a hydraulic press or a screw-on cap, could very easily flake off parts of the stainless steel into the product and lead to compliance failures. These failures could potentially cost the producer hundreds of thousands of dollars, but this is not just a producer issue. This is also an end user, a consumer issue, the people that are actually using these cartridges. Due to the high variability in how nickel is leached into these products over time, cartridges which have already passed compliance testing and therefore been labeled as safe can very easily later be found with concentrations of nickel which exceed the action limit due to metal leaching. Therefore, this could be a huge public health concern due to the fact that cartridges which have been labeled as safe by the state of Michigan are therefore getting into the hands of consumers with toxic levels of nickel. Now, the manufacturers that took part in this study have already been notified of its findings and are taking the necessary steps to resolve the issue, both for their sake and for the sake of public health. However, if this issue is really going to change and the public health concern is going to be resolved, this has to be more than just for manufacturers. There has to be wide sweeping change within the industry in changing in both the regulations governing these cartridges and with the manufacturing processes that produce them. Now I would like to acknowledge a couple fine people, including the tremendous workers at Cambium Analytica, including Genevieve Chevrolet, who taught me basically everything I need to know about ICP-MS, Leslie Nagy for her help in writing up this thesis, and Alex Adams for his help in funding it. At Lake Superior State, I'd also like to thank Dr. Wynn for helping me to compile it in such a way that I can communicate it to you guys. Thank you very much for listening, and have a great day.